Ever lay awake at night and wonder, like, what is it all about? Where do we go if we go anywhere after this?
The ultimate question.
The ultimate, right. Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because today we are diving headfirst into the great unknown. We're talking about what happens after we die.
The afterlife.
The afterlife. But, and here's the kicker, this isn't your grandma's afterlife seminar with, we're not talking about poorly gates and all that jazz. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
Of course not.
we got this source, right, that you, our amazing listeners, sent in. And it's basically like a choose your own adventure for the soul. It ranks all these possibilities after death from the, shall we say, logically likely to the what in the multiverse is going on.
It's a fascinating spectrum.
It really is. Makes you question not just death, but like what we even know about, well, knowing things. So we're starting with what this source calls the, quote, C tier, the logical. But even these aren't exactly, comforting bedtime stories. First up, we've got total annihilation, lights out, game over, thanks for playing.
Right, so from a purely scientific, materialist perspective,
Hit us with it.
this is the most straightforward answer. Consciousness is a product of the brain. When the brain stops.
Poof. No more consciousness.
Exactly.
So no, like, heavenly cloud upload for our digital souls.
No, not in this scenario. Think of it this way. We don't really mourn the lack of conscious thought we had before we were born.
Right. I don't think so.
Right. So this perspective basically says that state is essentially the same as what happens after death.
Okay, see, now that's both oddly reassuring and also terrifying in a very deep existential way.
It's all about perspective.
It really is. Okay, so that was cheery. Let's move on to the next, quote, logical option on the list. Natural recycling. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes, and all that. We basically just become part of the ecosystem again.
The circle of life.
Talk about reducing your carbon footprint, right? So it's definitely grounded in the very real, very cyclical reality of nature. I'm just not sure how much comfort it offers in terms of, like, personal legacy, unless you consider being really good compost a point of pride.
Right. And that's the crux of it, isn't it? For some, that interconnectedness with nature, the knowledge that they'll nourish new life, that's enough. It's beautiful in a way. But for others, that lack of a spiritual component, the absence of a self that persists, that's a deal breaker.
Which I think speaks to something really interesting. Even with these logical options, there's still this very human desire for something more, something beyond the material. Okay, so B tier, the classics. We're talking big hitters here, ideas that have been around for centuries, debated, pondered, you name it, across cultures, where philosophy meets folklore and maybe, just maybe, hints at something more. So, what's first on our playlist of ancient wisdom?
Let's start with reincarnation.
Okay, yeah.
The idea that our essence, our soul, whatever you want to call it, doesn't just vanish after death, but is reborn into a new life.
And not always a human one.
Not necessarily.
I'm picturing like some giant cosmic scorecard that dictates whether you come back as, I don't know, a benevolent leader or like a dung beetle.
Right, the concept of karma. It's an intriguing one, isn't it?
Yeah.
This idea of a karmic cycle, where actions have consequences that can ripple across lifetimes. It's a theme that pops up in various forms across cultures.
Oh, absolutely.
Some traditions focus on ascending to higher states of being, reaching enlightenment, while others emphasize the importance of breaking free from this cycle of birth and rebirth altogether.
But the common thread being that death isn't the end, it's a transition point, a doorway almost.
Exactly, and that's a very different way of thinking about existence than, say, the linear view of life and death that many of us are accustomed to.
It really is. And it makes you think about identity in a whole new light. Like, if we're constantly being reborn into new forms, what does it even mean to have a self?
The age-old question.
Is there some, like, core essence that stays consistent across lifetimes? Or are we basically blank slates with each go-around?
Questions philosophers and spiritual seekers have grappled with for millennia, really, with no easy answers.
Right. It kind of hurts your brain to think about it too long.
It does.
But I think for our deep dive today, the takeaway here is the enduring power of this idea.
Absolutely.
Reincarnation, it offers a framework for understanding not just death, but this interconnectedness of all things. We're all part of this grand cosmic tapestry.
It encourages us to think beyond our individual lives and consider the impact of our actions on a much larger scale.
Which is a pretty profound thought when you really let it sink in.
Okay.
So, reincarnation, check. What other classic theory are we digging into today?
Well, we can't talk about the afterlife without addressing the elephant in the room, can we?
Oh boy, here we go.
Heaven and hell.
The big two.
These concepts have captivated and terrified humanity for, well, forever, it seems. They offer this very stark choice, a cosmic system of rewards and punishments based on how we live our lives.
And it's so fascinating how these concepts, while originating from, religious doctrine, they also tap into something deeply human, this desire for justice, for meaning, for some kind of, cosmic scorecard that balances the scales. Because whether you subscribe to these beliefs literally or not, there's no denying the impact they've had on human history, art, literature, you name it. The fear of eternal damnation or the promise of paradise, it's shaped moral codes, inspired countless works of art, fueled philosophical debates.
For centuries.
It really makes you wonder, are heaven and hell actual physical places we go to after we die? Or are they more like states of being, reflections of our own internal struggles with good and evil, but right here, right now?
Perhaps a bit of both. Maybe these concepts, while rooted in specific religious frameworks, also speak to something universal about the human experience. Our capacity for both great love and terrible cruelty. Our constant grappling with the complexities of right and wrong.
Right, because it's not always so black and white.
Exactly.
It's like these stories, whether we take them literally or not, they hold up a mirror to our own hearts, force us to ask some tough questions about how we're choosing to live our lives. Which, leads us to a really interesting point, right? If these classic concepts of the afterlife could be seen as reflections of our own internal landscapes, our own psychology, then what happens when we start blending those concepts with cutting-edge scientific theories?
Now that's where things get really interesting.
Right. It's like, hold on to your hats, folks, because we're about to bump it up a notch to a tier where science fiction gets real. All right, a tier where science fiction gets real. I feel like I should have brought a helmet for this part of the deep dive. Where are we teleporting to first?
Hold on to your hats because we're diving headfirst into the multiverse.
Okay, the multiverse. I think I've seen enough movies to be dangerous. We're talking about the idea that our universe isn't the only one, right? There are infinite parallel universes all happening at the same time.
You got it. It's a mind-bending concept that's been explored in science fiction, but it also pops up in some pretty serious scientific discussions.
So it's not just me daydreaming about a parallel universe where, I actually became a rock star instead of just playing air guitar in my bathroom mirror.
You never know, maybe in a parallel universe, you're interviewing me on your multi-award-winning podcast.
Right back at you. But, okay, seriously, you're saying the multiverse is a real thing scientists are actually considering?
Absolutely. When you start digging into things like quantum mechanics and cosmology, certain theories and calculations actually suggest that multiple universes might be possible.
Whoa. So then death wouldn't really be an ending, but more like a transition to one of these other universes.
Potentially.
Like flipping through channels on the ultimate cosmic cable package?
In a way, yeah. Maybe a universe where gravity works in reverse, or time flows backward.
Okay, now my brain is officially tied in a knot. But, gotta ask, if there are infinite versions of ourselves out there living out every possible choice, does that mean the choices we make here don't really matter?
That's a question that philosophers are still debating. It gets to the heart of free will versus determinism. Do we have the power to shape our destiny, or are we just along for the ride?
It's a lot, right?
It is. But even if the multiverse is real, it doesn't negate the significance of our experiences in this reality. We're only ever truly conscious of this version of ourselves living out these choices.
So savor that good cup of coffee, folks, because there's no guarantee the other universes have good baristas.
Exactly.
But speaking of reality as we know it, our next stop on this mind-bending tour takes us right to the edge of what we even consider real.
This one's a doozy.
Hit me.
The simulation theory.
Okay, here we go. Are you about to tell me we're all just living in a giant video game controlled by some super advanced civilization?
It's crazy, right?
Just a tad.
But some compelling philosophical arguments suggest it's not as far-fetched as it seems.
All right, I'm listening. Convince me we're not just figments of some cosmic programmer's imagination.
Well, have you ever heard of the simulation argument?
Vaguely. Don't leave me hanging.
Right, so it was proposed by a philosopher, Nick Bostrom. It essentially argues that if a civilization reaches a point where it can create hyper-realistic simulations of conscious beings, then statistically, it's more likely that we're living in a simulation than not.
So you're saying our reality is just ones and zeros, lines of code.
It's a possibility.
And our thoughts, emotions, experiences, just algorithms.
Think about it this way. Even in a simulated reality, our experiences, relationships, emotions, they still hold meaning within that context. We still feel love, joy, sorrow, connection, even if those feelings are the result of complex algorithms.
Mind blown. But okay, let's say hypothetically this is all a simulation. What happens when we die? Is it like a system error? Do we just log out?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe death in a simulated world is like leveling up, a transition to a whole new reality, one beyond our wildest imaginations.
Okay, I kind of like that idea. A cosmic video game where death is just the next level. But I gotta be honest, as fun as it is to bend my brain into a pretzel with these theories, I think we're reaching the outer limits of what we can even try to understand.
I agree with that.
So where do we go from here?
Into the realm where things get really weird.
S tier. Consciousness gets weird, right? That's what our source calls it.
We're wading into the cosmic soup of ideas that defy easy explanation. Concepts like becoming pure energy, existing beyond space and time, maybe even merging with some kind of universal consciousness.
I don't even know what to say. It's incredible and maybe a little terrifying.
Understandably so. This is where language starts to break down, and we're left with more questions than answers.
But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to have all the answers. Maybe that's part of the mystery and the beauty of it all.
Perhaps the biggest takeaway from all of this, from this entire deep dive, is that the afterlife, whatever form it takes, is probably far stranger and more wondrous than we can even imagine right now.
So what happens after we die? We don't know. But wow, is it fascinating to think about. And who knows, maybe someday we'll each get to experience it firsthand.
And until then, we keep asking the big questions.
We keep exploring the possibilities. We keep diving deep. Join us next time when we tackle another mind-blowing mystery here on The Deep Dive.